Well, Ben V joining us today.
Yeah.
Thanks for driving up.
Why are you here?
I have no idea. We'll
don't
find out as we go.
We don't either.
We invited you, though.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a nice drive.
Well, I wanted to talk about... We're about done with David. You about done with David?
No, actually, we're
Talking
not.
about David.
We
for
got
a long
this week
time.
and next week.
and the
David,
following.
But I don't
We
preach
have
about
3
David
weeks?
anymore.
I
I've
think
moved
so.
on.
Oh, you're done?
I'm not.
You don't preach till October?
November, I think.
I was
That's
telling.
why I'm preaching so much.
Yeah. I was telling somebody yesterday in conversation, I said that the really cool thing with this series is that there's a lot of stories that people did not hear in Sunday school.
No,
Mm-hmm.
well, good
Oh,
reason.
like-
And for
last
good
week?
reason. Yeah, like last week. But I mean,
Three
I
weeks.
think those stories really do relate to people in the real world. I mean, it's the stuff you read on news, but it's real people, real issues. So
I have to make a clarification because last week in the podcast, I said no one in my group had heard of this story. I was corrected last night at my life group.
From who?
From our leader, who took great offense to that statement because
Rightly so.
because she had just finished the reading plan that we put out, and she's like, I had just read that. I may have not been familiar with all the details of that, but she knew it. And then she proceeded to tell the entire story, chapters 13 through 19, and hit like every main point.
Nice.
So
In under a minute?
Way better than you did, I'm sure.
it wasn't under a minute, but she did it very,
Can I speak to her?
very clearly.
Can I speak to her? I don't understand how you could lead a group with him in it.
She does a great job. Her and her
God's
husband do a
grace
great
to
job.
you.
Yeah.
Speaking of
they do
grace.
it as shared leadership. That's the key.
Never heard of it.
So they do a great job. Thank you, Ashley.
It's good. So we're gonna start talking about David in a little bit here, but I just wanted. Well, Benham's coming up today for some sermon planning because we're working on 2023 right now, and I wanted to talk about Greece for just a bit. Some of the things we're looking forward to because we're going to start
That was a great movie.
sharing that. Olivia Newton-John just passed away.
just recently. Yeah.
Very sad.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about. Greece is in the country, Greece, and we're gonna start sharing that story from the Book of Acts. What are you looking forward to with that, Matt?
I just started actually reading I'm doing the first week. So I started reading through the text and I was like,
You did read it before we went, right?
oh no. Yeah. But I started rereading through the text. Thank you. And I thought to myself, man, do I really need 30 minutes? I mean,
People just want to see the videos.
yeah.
Yeah. It's like a slideshow
I was thinking
of
like-
a vacation
Like
you went
Food
on.
Network kind
Who
of.
wants to watch a slideshow of our vacation, though? That's the
Well, it was a pretty boring vacation if that was like exciting things because it's all historical. So I had one lady tell me, she's like, "Oh, I'm excited for this Greece series, but it's not going to be like historical, right?" And I was like, "No, that's like what we did."
Actually, it's all historical.
Yeah. So
all
that's going to be good.
That's why we went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm excited
That
to
and Greek
start it.
salads, right, Ben?
Greek salad. Is
This guy
amazing.
slayed some Greek salad.
It was like his go-to meal
Favorite thing.
It was a
everywhere.
Greek salad for breakfast.
Favorite thing. Bring it on. A whole plate.
I mean, it is very healthy. So.
Did you ever get that mix that
Yep.
Levi got you?
Very good.
Was it?
It's
Good.
really good. I got a little too much olive oil in that last batch, but the rest of it was really good.
So what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, what are you looking
Oh.
for, Matt?
To teach it? I'm looking forward to just like being able to show people it's a real place. Like, I think for a lot of people when they think New Testament, they think Israel.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody thinks. Let's go to Israel so we can see where the Bible happened. And it happened in a lot more than just Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been to Turkey. We've done Israel and Greece, and then there's also Italy. That sounds good, doesn't it?
You guys free in a couple weeks?
A little pasta,
Yeah.
Italy, and then of course there's Egypt. I'm working on a plan to go to Egypt to actually teach at a mission there and see some of the sites in Egypt. There's Syria, which we're not going to.
I know I got a contact in Syria.
That's okay. You can go. And then
Yeah, I'm
there's,
busy that weekend.
There's Jordan. Jordan, which we could eventually end up going visit Jordan someday.
We've been on the border of it.
Yeah, we got a plan, a traveling plan. But the Bible's it's a big area. But it's somebody said, well, why should I go? And I said, well, I love to travel, so I don't need a lot of excuse to go. But to me, faith is about stepping into what we can't see, what we can't prove, and the smaller that step is, the better. Mm-hmm. And so if you can see, if you can prove, you close the gap, and it just helps solidify what I already believe for myself. This is a real story. It's a real book. It's true. It's trustworthy. The details in this are spot on. Mm-hmm. And so those details that, simple things like locations and things that I can learn about help me close the gap on things that I can't see, I can't experience, but are true as well.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm looking forward to, helping people close the gap.
Yeah. I think, too, is Athens really stood out to me, even though it's probably not a place I would necessarily go hang out and spend a lot of time at again. But it's Paul was there and taking opportunities that were all around him, and the opportunities are immense everywhere we go. And I think tying that together for people is really his journeys. He was looking for where God was already at work in the hearts and minds of these people, and then pointing them to God. And we can do that wherever God has us today. So
Yeah, I mean, he receives the call to go, the vision to go, and he gets it the next day and he goes.
Yeah.
There's a lesson right there in itself.
Right.
So.
Is his microphone up in the recording? Because it's not in my headphones. I can't hear. I don't really want to hear him, but as long as people can.
That's good.
Jeff would like a little bit more of me. Seriously.
I'll lean forward for you, Jeff.
My hearing is going. So I wanted to mention that, and then I wanted to encourage people as a result of that conversation to download the app. Because a lot of our material, a lot of folks don't come to Christ Church on Sunday, so they're not in our vast podcast listening audience.
It's huge.
They're not catching the message we're giving folks every day to get the app, Christ Church US. You have to search to get it. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of the stuff...
Yeah, you don't want to get our international campus app.
A lot of the stuff that we're going to put on about Greece, or that we put on now, can be located here, and it's an easy access, quick access.
I was hoping you were turning your phone around to Moultrie Mobile, your trail cam pictures.
That's my secret, private.
Can't reveal those sources.
Can't divulge those locations. Nope. All right, so let's jump into David. This is your story, Matt.
Well,
Andrew.
no, it's God's story. We're just teaching it.
See what you did there.
Good.
Yeah.
His
So-
story.
Mephibosheth.
Chapter 19, where you left it.
Yeah.
You left
Who?
it.
Yeah. I'm going to call him M whenever I preach it in Clay County.
Are you?
Mephibosheth.
Yeah.
So we ended last week with you guys talking about David's family falling apart, right?
That was really an encouraging message.
Very encouraging. And then David has that conversation there in chapter 19 with Mephibosheth.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to kind of paint the picture of that
Well,
whole conversation?
So we got to back up just a little bit because David's coming back into the city.
Yep.
And he got a lot of criticism when he was leaving the city. Rocks being thrown at him, curses, all this stuff. The threat of Absalom is put down. Shimei is put down. He's coming back, as king into the city. And we see one of David's more finer points. And, he's discouraged, but Joab encourages him. He comes back, leads these people, and he's going to be gracious, is really what we see here. He's gracious. He doesn't have the dude that threw rocks at him killed as he comes back in. And then Mephibosheth, comes to him, and he has this conversation with him. And Mephibosheth is left behind. We know that in chapter 16 by Ziba, whenever Ziba gets out of town, and he paints this picture that, hey, Mephibosheth's waiting to be set up as king. He thinks you're going to die. I'm going to come and serve you. And David's like, okay, you can have all his land then.
Which is a crazy thing. It's a poor leadership moment.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, fine,
Well,
you can come with me.
so
you can have it all.
impulsive.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
Well, and you got to remember, let's not be too quick to judge. We don't have the whole, everything going on here, but we know that David's in distress at that point.
Sure.
And so, whatever. But yeah, he makes a poor leadership decision and gives it all to Ziba.
Well, let's back up further because I'm thinking outside of Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
That was good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Very few people.
She knows this story, I'm sure.
Very few people probably know the whole context of who even we're talking about. Mephibosheth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to go from chapter 19 back to chapter 9. And I think
4.
well, yeah, you got to go back to verse 4, but I think it's interesting that
You actually got to go back to 1 Samuel 20.
okay, let's go back
Genesis.
to Genesis 1.
Really, in the beginning, God started there. So,
But it's interesting that he shows back up here in chapter 19.
Yeah.
But going back, he is given grace by David. We find out in chapter 9 that David wants to show kindness to anyone that's left in Saul's bloodline, his family line. In order to understand that, you got to go back to chapter 20 of 1 Samuel and chapter 24. He makes a promise to Jonathan, hey, I won't destroy your bloodline from the face of the earth. He does the same thing to Saul outside of the cave.
Jonathan is Saul's son.
Yep. And so he's got this promise that he made, and he's keeping his promise.
Mm-hmm.
He's wondering, who can I show kindness to for God's sake? And that's where he finds out that Jonathan has a son.
Yep. So, some interesting things just to highlight about Mephibosheth. He's actually mentioned in Chronicles as having a different name.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit in his name, but they didn't like saying Mephibosheth in Hebrew because Sheth was disgrace. But his name actually means the destroyer of shame. And so it's interesting because he's lame, and so people would have had a certain perspective of him or view of him in that
Lame,
culture.
and the text tells us exactly how he was
And that's
lame.
chapter 4. His maidservant when he was 5 years old picks him up when Saul's fleeing and drops him.
Yeah, they find out that
Breaks his
Saul and
feet.
Jonathan have been killed in battle.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about that. I mean, Mephibosheth is third in line to be king.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a pretty certain future, but that's gone.
So when Saul and Jonathan are both killed in the same day of battle, by bloodline, Mephibosheth should have been king.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ishbosheth, Saul's other son.
Other son.
Mm-hmm. But then he's killed very quickly.
Right. So yeah. So then the line falls to Jonathan's son.
Yeah.
Unless Ishbosheth had a son.
Yeah.
Confusing.
It's very messy.
Yeah, that's true.
But so he can't walk for the rest of his life. You said feet, broke his feet.
Well, yeah.
I mean, who
Could be
knows?
legs, whatever.
Who knows? It could have injured his spinal cord. He could be.
Who knows?
Who
Yeah.
knows? But he has to be carried. He's not taken care of. And hey, we've been over there now, modern times, and it is not a handicap accessible country.
No, not at all.
Can't even imagine what it was like then.
Right.
So he is a totally dependent person. Really.
Yeah. And so in chapter 9, whenever David, says, hey, like, can I show favor to any of these people? They're like, yeah, Jonathan's son, who's living out in Lodabar, which we often just I've
Sounds
been
like a
guilty of.
resort.
I like it. Lodibar.
Yeah. Lodabar, except it means no pasture. So that's literally what that means is
No
no
good.
pasture. So it was a ghetto about 3 miles in the wrong direction across the tracks.
Is it out in the Judean wilderness?
That's where you're headed, yeah. And it's not a great place. So it's a forgotten place. It's a desolate place. It's a place people would go and hide. So wilderness, like edge of the wilderness, to basically either escape or that's where people got sent to be forgotten. And now his name, Mephibosheth, the destroyer of shame, is living in full shame, forgotten, and sent out
by no doing of his own.
by no doing of his own necessarily,
Just
but
dropped.
Just dropped. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
That may have saved him, though.
Right.
Because I mean, culturally, David didn't. We know that from the story with Saul. David didn't kill Saul when he had the opportunity. So it's, he's not destroying all of Saul's descendants. But that culturally would have been what would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
But he's still like living in a little bit what you said. Like he still has bitterness and resentment because the person who put him in this situation is David. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like
and
a new family came to the throne, and he's out.
yeah.
And even on top of all that, you just sit back and kind of think through that situation. Here's this little kid who his maidservant, drops him. His dad's mentally really declining in a way that he wasn't taking care of him.
Well, Jonathan was fine.
And
He's dead at that
Yeah,
point.
Jonathan's dead at that
yeah,
point.
right.
dead.
His grandparent. Yeah, and
Grandpa's
everybody in his whole life is
Let him
gone.
down.
Gone.
Everybody's let him down. Everybody has, and David really, even in the fact that this is kind of occurring because of David didn't do the thing to his grandfather that he could have done. I mean, it's almost like David couldn't have made the right decision almost any which way he would have taken it. But Mephibosheth is that's why you don't want to say that, because I just pretty much I just babbled the name out.
Just say it fast.
Just say it fast, and
Sounds
nobody
right.
will know.
Mephibosheth.
And they're going to need spit shields in the front row at Clay because
I'm going to just say M. It's a
yeah,
lot easier.
this dude, this guy. But I mean, here he is living in such a life that everything was imposed upon him, rather than him having any kind of control of his own fate or his destinations.
So another observation in this too is like someone has to always provide for him. He's not able to provide for himself because he can't go out physically work and do these things. So he's at the mercy of somebody.
Yeah.
But in steps David, and he, chapter 9 says, "Who can I show this favor to?"
And not only that, but
That's
he
when the story
says
gets good.
here when he pulls in Ziba, and you get an even clearer picture of this kindness, because it says the king asked, "Is there anyone still alive from the house of Saul whom I can show God's kindness?" And so it's a deeper level into like we're not talking about earthly love here. We're talking about this compassion and this grace that comes from God. David's a foreshadowing of Jesus, right? And it's a whole nother type of love.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was hinting towards when I said, this is not normal. What culturally would have happened, because there's still going to be people who maybe have an alliance or allegiance to Saul who think that's the proper bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
And so by keeping Mephibosheth alive and now bringing him into the palace, because that's what David does, he says, he's going to eat at my table. You're keeping this threat, although he's unable to walk, and that probably impacts his ability. Who knows? But you're keeping him alive. That this is an act of incredible graciousness.
Amazing.
Well, and here's the thing. It has nothing to do with Mephibosheth. It has everything to do with Jonathan. Because of what David and Jonathan, the covenant they had between one another, Mephibosheth is the recipient of the promise of his father.
That's
Think
the
about
picture
that
of
on
grace,
a Christological.
Right? Grace is an unmerited favor.
Yeah.
Right.
We are beneficiaries of a work that was done on our behalf.
Well,
Nothing
think
because
about-
we've done.
Think about like David calls Ziba in. He finds out, Jonathan has a son in Lodabar, and then he sends for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine the journey from Lodabar to Jerusalem.
This is it. I'm dead.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like if I'm sitting there and I'm Mephibosheth, I'm like, why don't you just kill me here?
Mm-hmm.
Like why
Yeah.
make me go to Jerusalem and be killed in front of the king? This is crazy.
And then the thought process is he just wants to bring me to Jerusalem to humiliate me and our family even further. That's
Yeah.
his intention. He's going to kill a crippled guy right in front of the whole world, And you'd have, your mind
power.
would degenerate to that level.
For sure.
So there's also, when David, this is just kind of crazy, but when David takes the city of Jerusalem, like back in, is it 1 Samuel?
It's in
No, it's in 2
Second
Samuel,
Samuel
right at the beginning.
5?
Yeah. The Jebusites say, even the blind and the deaf couldn't, or can defend the city. and David makes a proclamation that there won't be any blind or deaf or lame people ever like be able to enter the city. And he's saying it like kind of jokingly in that regard of playing on that situation, but there's this picture that he is bringing in someone who is lame, not just to the city, but to sit at his table.
Right.
And there's this picture of redemption and restoration even in that.
Yeah, I mean, he calls him his son, which is, in that culture, like crazy.
That's his connection to Jonathan coming through.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think back then now to our series that we did in Psalm 23, the end of Psalm 23 says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." David has gone from being the one who is saying to God, "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies." Now Mephibosheth can actually recite that prayer and know that now table has been prepared for him, really in the presence of his enemies in a sense, and the graciousness that was shown to David by God now is being extended, like you said, in the fact that he's a picture of Christ or a type of Christ. It's just an amazing way, the way God works those narratives together to show us that, creation, fall, redemption, and restoration process. It just is living itself out with Mephibosheth right there.
Jeff, you talked about when we did that Psalm 23 series about like being invited into the tent or to meal table idea, because I think a lot of times I heard a preacher on the internet talk about a table.
We're on the internet.
Yeah, I know. It was a table though,
Kind of, right?
that
Yeah.
David was inviting Mephibosheth to, like, and that.
They think food.
Well, no, it was like a physical, like Western table, and how like people with disabilities are equal when we said it, and that was the whole message. But you talked about in the Psalm 23 when you were invited in to share a meal in a tent or at the table, which probably would have been like a piece of leather laid out on the ground or something like that. It signified way more than just a meal.
Yeah.
It was the ultimate act of hospitality, and like you were together. It's like fellowship on an intense level.
It's an acceptance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I just point out when David invites Mephibosheth to the table, it's protection, it's provision, and it's like purpose.
Yeah.
It's brand new.
It's a brand new identity.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to watch your conduct. Like, you're in the family. Like, you've been accepted. I've changed your identity. You're in my family.
And what is the king's is yours.
Yep.
That's the picture of this invitation into fellowship with David. And, Mephibosheth is, says, "Why have you taken notice of a dead dog like me?"
Yeah. That even makes me jump forward to like Jesus at the Last Supper. When he invites them into the Last Supper, he knows he's inviting one who is the potential, and he knows that is going to betray him. What kind of risk does David take in this regard? He's giving Mephibosheth a seat at the table, but he's also giving this opportunity for the guy whose grandpa was the king, who's, all these things that Mephibosheth could then work the back channels. David's on shaky ground anyway, as we were talking about a while ago. He's not, things are occurring in his own family. He calls this guy his son. What could that son possibly do if you invite him in? And so even David is taking a great risk in a way, asking him to come.
One of the Herods killed two of his own sons because of their threat to the throne.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
You jumped forward with the story. Let's take another leap forward, because I think this is one of the most beautiful.
It's like quantum leap.
This is a big one. This is
Love
one
that
of the
show.
most beautiful elements of the picture of grace in our life, is that ultimately what's the first thing, Scripture talks about Revelation, that we're going to do in the presence of God when we enter into heaven. We're going to sit at the table.
Yeah.
Right? And we have a seat at the table in much the same way that Mephibosheth did. We come in lame because of our sin.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible invitation of grace that we get to sit at the table and sit with Christ.
And we're still going to betray him.
Yeah.
And he knows we're going to betray him, but he allows us there, that spot anyway.
Come in at his invitation.
At his invitation to come. Yeah.
Ephesians 2.
Yeah.
You were dead. And then he says, but Christ. And then he says he seated you. Like, that's awesome. But you look at the way that Mephibosheth comes into David, and we don't know from the text how that played out. Like, we don't know if they drug Mephibosheth in front of David. We have no idea.
Are you saying physically drug him because he couldn't walk, or because,
I don't know.
I just was trying to figure out the word.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know how he got it in front of David, but when he gets in front of the king, he bows and he worships it. You know, he falls at his feet.
Yeah.
And he is totally at a place of, he is totally dependent upon David. You know? And David extends that grace to him. And then he has Ziba serve him with his servants and his sons. And Ziba's watching all this grace play out, which I think takes us back to chapter 19.
Mm-hmm.
Ziba's around grace and he sees grace, but he doesn't want to be like Mephibosheth in humility. And so he tries to manipulate himself to David's good graces.
Ziba is like the people that Jesus talks about when judgment comes, and he says, many, I don't know you. Many cry out and they say, well, I did this, I did this, I did this. He said, I don't know you.
Mm-hmm.
Depart from me.
Yeah.
It's like observing grace, seeing grace, knowing that I can't earn this invitation to sit at the table with Christ. And so I'm always in my heart separated from that. That's who he is to me. It's like this person that, well, I know it's by grace, but
he's trying to use God and use this grace
he's
for his own benefit.
He's successful in manipulating David.
Mm-hmm.
He throws Mephibosheth under the bus.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Yeah, leaves him behind.
Yeah, he literally is responsible for transporting him.
And he says that it's Mephibosheth's idea.
Yeah, he wanted to be the king.
Which is not true. You can tell by Mephibosheth's response later.
And then David sees it, and he goes, well, he's pretty powerful. There's some people that are really like Ziba. And so he gives half back to Mephibosheth.
Which I didn't understand that part.
It's just weird.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at Mephibosheth's response in verse 30.
That's what I like.
And he's like, listen, David, if I have you, Ziba can have it all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just want to be with the king.
Yeah.
You can have the whole world.
You can have
Give
it.
me Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it really crazy when you talk about the picture of grace and you jumped the quantum leap forward to our relationship with him? A lot of times it's that same thing of Christians. I think Christians in the church oftentimes get this wrong, where they think that people who are coming to the church are supposed to somehow clean up and shave their face and get their act together before you start joining us. And it's just the opposite way it works. That God's grace invites you in the worst possible circumstances, in the moments when you are a dead dog. That's when Jesus wants to pull you close. He'll clean that up as he goes along, as the Spirit enters in. So that's a really interesting parallel too. And I think it's probably the preacher in me, but if you need an example, there's many, but if you need an example of why the Old Testament is relevant reading and study for your relationship to God, so many people dismiss the Old Testament because they say it's a story about stuff that I don't understand, and it's weird, and there's things in there I don't understand. Man, we just drew 3 major parallels to our relationship with God, not even just to the New Testament.
One story always.
Yeah. So I find that to be fascinating, and if people are listening and can understand that, it opens up a whole new world. It's that idea of the Jesus is in the Old Testament concealed, in the New Testament he's revealed. It's that whole idea that if you go looking for Jesus, you're going to find him in all those places. So
Mephibosheth identifies what he deserves as well. In the end there, he says, I myself and my whole family deserved death. And that comes back to the cultural thing. That's what he deserves. And he knows he deserves that. But he also has experienced grace. And that's why when you see him say
life.
Yeah.
There's so many parallels there. I love this story.
And I think really
Sin is death.
keeps coming back to this idea of like, how are you going to respond to this grace?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to try to receive it through manipulation and power? Or are you going to fall at the feet of the king?
Yeah.
And be
So-
forever grateful.
So
Yeah.
go to the cross. The two thieves, or two, rebels. Let's
Yeah.
call them two rebels on either side. One responds to the invitation of Jesus and says, "Surely you are the Messiah," and the other one mocks.
Yeah.
Both of them deserve death. One of them receives life, and one of them gets what he deserves.
Today you'll be with me in paradise. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you
That's
look
what he
at-
offers. Like,
Yeah.
what's our posture towards Jesus?
Yep.
How are we going to respond to the invitation of coming to the table?
Well, like you and I talked about this week, and we're way over time, but it's gonna happen on Sunday too. So,
No, it ain't.
but
22 minutes.
we talked about how like the number one posture people want to make sure they never are in is in weakness.
Mm.
And until we realize like our weakness is actually our greatest strength, we will never be able to receive this grace.
Yeah.
So,
That's a good story. Mr. Mephibosheth. All right. Thanks for joining us on the ReThink Podcast.